He's back in Hyannisport with Jackie and Caroline, and we set up the election returns. And that, too, was one of the longest nights of my life. That Jack Kennedy is standing still with 241 electoral college votes. And there's 4 states out there. And he needs 269. He went to bed at 3:45, not knowing for sure whether he had won or lost. And I remember saying to him, Jack, it was the last time I called him Jack. How can you go to bed now? We crisscrossed this country for 4 years. And he gave me the only intelligent answer. He said, because it's too late to change another vote, and I'm very tired. While he slept, Michigan came in with 20 to make it 261. And then about 5 in the morning, Minnesota, 11, made it 272. And later, Illinois came in with 27, and New Mexico with 4. The final count was 303 to 219. It did not reflect the electoral vote of 303 to 219 did not reflect the popular vote. That out of 69 million votes cast, Kennedy only won by 118,550. The final, Kennedy had 49.7, Nixon had 49.5, and there was 0.8% divided among minor candidates. Can we cut now?
Yes, absolutely. We should change here. Okay, I've got 7 seconds. Go ahead.
Walker?
Second. Anytime.
I remember him most for his humor and humility. That as he campaigned during this 14-hour period, the 14 years, and his 2 years and 10 months and 2 days in the White House, I remember that he was the same man on Bunker Hill campaigning for Congress as he was on Beacon Hill when he defeated Henry Cabot Lodge for the U.S. Senate, and the same man on Capitol Hill and the same man in the White House, that he never lost his humor or his humility. He had I used to kid him that he had a 3-decker sense of humor, that we each laughed about the same stories. That in his very, very first campaign, they were trying to accuse him of being a carpetbagger and not a townie. And this fellow stood up at a rally and, hey, Kennedy, where you from? Palm Beach? Cape Cod? New York? You do not belong here. And Jack Kennedy, I noticed over the years, we talked about his courage, he was always a better speaker when he was a little angry. And he walked out in the front of the stage. It was a big rally at this hall. And he said, no one asked for my address when I was on a PT boat in the Solomon Islands. And the crowd loved it. This was the year of the veteran. In 1946, if you did not have the word veteran beside your name on the ballot, you couldn't be elected dog catcher. And I loved him when he was fighting. I knew he was ready for the first debate with Vice President Nixon. He had rehearsed the opening statement, and this was a challenge. This was the first time that they would be toe-to-toe. And as he dressed for the debate, I said to him, he said he felt like a boxer going into the Madison Square Garden, perhaps the heavyweight championship. And I said, no, it's more like the opening day pitcher in the World Series, because you are going to have to win 4 of these. And he liked that comparison. He said, I guess you're right. But he spent 3 days going over the questions and answers that he might be asked by the press or by Vice President Nixon. And then he reached a period. It was Monday about 5. And he put all the notes aside, and he said, if I'm not ready for Nixon now, I never will be. And that first debate, he felt, turned the election around and was responsible for his narrow victory. The second, third, and fourth debates proved helpful, but he thought the first debate was the turning point in the campaign. But in all the years, whether it was the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis, or the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, which I remember him most for, that in every time, I could go through every day of the 2 years, 10 months, and 2 days that he was there. Most people discount the Bay of Pigs, but most people remember vividly the Cuban Missile Crisis, because we had never ever been as close to a nuclear confrontation up to that time or since that time. Now, I was not an advisor to the president, but I knew what he was doing every hour of that 13-day period. It was our off-year election in 1962, and he continued to campaign, hoping that he could keep the secret from the press until he had the opportunity to decide on a blockade, to get a consensus with the group called the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, and then tell the American people. He went on the air on Monday, and then that next week, because the world knows what is happening. We have never had a week from that Monday when he went on the air until the following Sunday, October 28th, when Khrushchev agreed to take the missiles out. And I was with him every hour. The first meeting was Tuesday, October the 16th, when he found out from McGeorge Bundy, his national security advisor, about the missiles. He set up a meeting after Ken O'Donnell, the appointment secretary, and I showed him the schedule. And there was some time between 11:30 and 1, because he had a state luncheon at 1 o'clock. And this group, McNamara and Dillon, George Ball, and McGeorge Bundy, his brother Bobby, and he gathered together the men that he knew he could depend on, the men that he had studied their work habits and their backgrounds for almost 2 years. It was far different than the Bay of Pigs. He had only been president 88 days when he had to say yes, no, or maybe. But this time, he was completely in charge. And once again, I am reminded about the 3 wishes. because on Tuesday at the first meeting, they're looking at the pictures that were taken from a U-2 on Sunday, October the 14th. And as we continue the campaign, the next day we're in Connecticut, it's the National Day of Prayer. And as we drop past St. Matthew's Church, I reminded the president of the Three Wishes again, and he said, "Today, I only have one wish." And I knew what it was. His chief concern all through this 13-day period was the children. Not just Caroline and John, and not just the children of America, but children all over the world who would suffer and die if he made the wrong decision. And he held out for the blockade, and thank God it turned out to be the correct measure. The works day was Saturday, October 27, 1962. In the White House, we referred to it as Black Saturday. Everything was going wrong. Major Rudolph Anderson, one of the U-2 pilots, who took the pictures on Sunday, October 14th, that President Kennedy saw on Tuesday the 16th, was shot down and killed by a SAM missile. He attended 3 different meetings of the executive committee that day. I stayed in the White House that night, had dinner with him. He didn't want to be alone at a time like this. Jackie and the children had gone to a safer place. And at a last resort, he sent his brother Bobby. He always depended on Bobby. Bobby Kennedy was Jack's strong right arm. He sent Bobby down to talk to the Russian ambassador, Dobrynin. And now I'm having dinner with the president. And Bobby came in, and all the news was bad. Nothing was changed, and you do this, well, they'll do that. And I continued to eat the chicken and drink the white wine nervously, I guess, because I was unaware the 2 brothers had stopped speaking when I heard that great voice. "Dave, you are eating the chicken and drinking the wine like it is your last supper." And I said, "Mr. President, after listening to you and Bobby, I'm not so sure it isn't. This is Saturday, Black Saturday." I slept in the White House that evening, and the next morning I'm up early. And I'm coming out of the mess hall. It's right near the Situation Room of the White House, where they keep track of events all over the world. And they had just received word that Khrushchev had agreed to take the missiles out under United Nations supervision. And I felt like I was born all over again. And now I went over on the first campaign.
Yeah,
I know she worked for Teddy afterwards.
and Mary Colbert or something?
Yeah, Mary is dead. Poor
Mary's
Mary.
not.
Yeah. Kay Whalen, I know. I could. What was her name before she was married? She married a fellow named Gus
Yeah,
Whalen.
Don't know that.
And we ready?
Okay, we can pick that up, yeah.
The toughest day of the 13 days of the Cuban Missile Crisis was the 12th. In the White House, we called it Black Saturday.
This part I got of that story.
Fine.
The part I don't have is the resolve of it, the
Okay,
hearing the news.
right. So I went over to go to Mass with the president. And as he stepped into the White House car, he was wearing that famous Kennedy victory grin, and he said, "Dave, this morning we have an extra reason to pray. And we sure did. And what a wonderful, wonderful feeling that to come that close to a nuclear confrontation. I think that history will always remember the 13 days. Almost like the assassination, people could tell you what they were doing at that time. Some people were storing food, and some were building foxholes and shelters, and some were buying bottled water. That all of you are too young to remember how scary it really was. But knowing Jack Kennedy as I had, I felt nothing but confidence. Do you know, the last 6 months of his life, I believe if President Kennedy was being interviewed instead of me, and you asked him, what event that took place during the presidential years would he most want to be remembered for? I believe he'd say the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. It was signed October 7th, 1963, and it was 46 days before the assassination. If you look back on the last 6 months of President Kennedy's life and checked his speeches, the speech at American University, which we called in the White House the peace speech, and it was a direct appeal to Khrushchev and the Russian people. It was one of his greatest speeches of all time. In fact, Chairman Khrushchev told Harriman, who was he represented us in Moscow to initial this treaty. He told him that President Kennedy's American University speech was the best speech he had heard since Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And in it he said, we all share this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's future. And we are all mortal. And I think of the speeches that he made everywhere he went. I was by his side. And it was peace, peace, peace. It used to bother him that too many people thought that we could not have peace. And that giant step in signing the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, when he talked about an old Chinese proverb, that a journey of 1,000 miles began with that first step. And he said, let us, at this time, take the first step. And it was the right step. And he felt from that time, that short time, the next 46 days before the tragic day in Dallas, that our relations with the Soviet Union were better than they had been at any time since he's 14 years in politics, as a congressman, as a senator. And he was confident that the next step would be a far greater one.
Mr. Paris, can we move that now to that day?
Yes.
The 22nd. And I would like you to tell us about that day as you experienced it.
Well,